Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's meeting of the Assembly Committee on Ways and Means, Senate Committee on Finance, Joint Subcommittee on Public Safety, Natural Resources, and Transportation. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Senator Gokenshia. Senator Harris. Senator Wynn. Here. Assemblywoman Anderson. Present. Assemblywoman Brown-May. Assemblywoman Dickman. Here. Assemblywoman Gorlow. Here. Assemblyman Hafen. Here. Chair Watts.
And I'm here. Please mark Assemblywoman Brown-May absent excused. All right, members. Today we have, looks like 5 budgets to review from the Department of Corrections. Welcome, Director Zarenda and your team. Whenever you're ready, you can state your name for the record, and we'll get started.
Yes, James Zarenda for the record. Good morning, Chair Harris and Chair Watts, members of the Joint Committee on Public Safety, Natural Resources, and Transportation. This is James Zarenda. I'm the Director for the Nevada Department of Corrections. With me at the table this morning, I have Deputy Director of Support Services, Christina Shea, and Deputy Director of Programs, Harold Wickham, who will just be facilitating the slide deck on my behalf. We are pleased to be before you this morning to present the Governor's recommended budget for the 23-25 biennium, including the department overview. The mission of the agency, the Department of Corrections, will improve public safety by ensuring a safe, humane environment that incorporates a proven rehabilitation initiatives that prepare individuals for successful reentry into our communities. Our vision is we reduce victimization and recidivism by providing offenders with incentives for self-improvement and the tools to effect change. Our philosophy, we will pursue our mission with integrity, act in a professional and ethical manner, and be responsible for our actions and raise the department to the highest standards. Our goal is to operate the department according to best practices, ensure the best use of our department resources, educate stakeholders and customers, and improve communication. The Nevada Department of Correction operates across a dispersed geographical area, with most of our institution and facilities located in the rural areas throughout the state. We have 7 major institutions, 2 transitional housing centers, 9 conservation camps across the state. The locations and rural nature of our operations creates a unique challenge for our department. The department has several important initiatives to achieve over the 23-25 biennium. Stabilize recruitment, retention, and staff well-being through the execution of HR human resources strategies. Create efficient and effective process department-wide. Collaborate with other agencies to work together towards department goals, initiate an audit, and provide upgrade recommendations to vital infrastructure. Collaborate with outside community partners for successful reentry, implementation of technology for upgrade of systems, and perform a staffing study to review and update our shift relief factor. Over the last 20 years, Nevada's prison population grew at a steady rate, hitting its peak in fiscal year of 2016 at 14,153 offenders. Since 2016, the department has seen a decrease in its total population with a slight leveling off of the dramatic decline in fiscal year of 2021. Since fiscal year 2018, we have continued to see a decline in our population with a decrease in admissions and an increase in parole grant rates. AB 236 during the 2019 legislative session made various changes concerning probation and parole, specialty courts, and certain sentencing guidelines that reducing the penalty for various crimes from Category B to a Category C felony appears to have had the impact on the length of stay for our felony C, D, and E offenders, which has impacted our minimum custody offender population and ultimately our rural fire camp operations. The state of Nevada contracts with JFA Associates LLC to provide the state with 3 inmate population forecasts, which project out the 10 years from which our budget is based. The first two forecasts were received for the agency's request and the governor's recommended budget. The final report, which was received on March 3rd, 2023, and is being currently reviewed by our agency and the governor's finance office. We will share that report with your staff this coming week so that we can reconcile the caseload-driven aspects of our budget for the 23-25 biennium. The JFA prison population projections are the foundation of our capacity analysis, biennium plan, and the long-term housing plan, both for female and male populations. One important component of the department's population is this type of admissions that we are experiencing in a given year. For calendar year 2022, we experienced nearly 50% of our admissions were due to new admissions or an offender sentenced to prison by a judge or court, 23% of the offenders that violated parole. An offender granted parole is an arrest on a warrant issued by the parole board due to violations of terms and conditions of their parole and have subsequently returned to an NDOC facility. And 20% of the offenders that violated probation, or an offender who is initially sentenced to probation by the court who has their probation revoked by the court due to violations of the terms and conditions of their probation, and subsequently, again, admitted to the Department of Corrections. The admissions, releases, and overall population for NDOC is a complex calculation involving many stakeholders and overall collaboration with many of the public safety organizations. One important dashboard for reviewing the prison population is the admission and release rates in any given period. In 2022, releases slightly outpaced admissions. The JFA predicts that discretionary parole rates will remain close to the 2022 rates at 63.7% for male and 79.4% for female, with the mandatory rates held at 70.9% for male and 87.0% for female. The dramatic drop in admissions in 2020 was primarily due to COVID-19 pandemic, and a rebound of new court admissions to the NDOC has emerged in 2022, with a continued rebound throughout the end of 2024. After this period, the JFA predicts that new commits will increase 2% a year on an average for the forecast horizon. At the end of February 2023, we had 9,229 male offenders in our institutions and facilities. According to the JFA, the male population is projected to increase to 9,633 in fiscal year 24 and 9,791 in fiscal year 25. The projected growth rate is predicted to grow at a rate of 2% per year for the next 10 years. We are seeing a change in the type of offender that enters NDOC institutions. The NDOC and the Sentencing Commission are preparing an analysis of the prison population by felony category, found out that about 85% of the prison population are either Category A or Category B. Specifically, about 30% of the prison population is Category A, and about 55% are Category B felons. We are experiencing an increase in violent crimes, and we are housing more serious and violent offenders in the Department of Correction. As the end of February 2023, we had 794 female offenders in our institutions and facilities. According to the JFA, the female population is projected to increase to 864 in fiscal year 24 and 896 in fiscal year 25. The projected future growth is predicted to grow at a rate of 3.2% per year over the next 10 years. This next photo is an aerial photo of High Desert State Prison located outside of Las Vegas. This facility is a great representation of the design of the institution, including core facilities such as medical infirmary, the culinary, and additional various designs of housing units that we have throughout the departments. The design of the institution and facility greatly impacts the way the budgets are crafted for the department. The NDOC legislatively approved staffing levels are based on charts identifying posts in various institutions. The department also uses a shift relief factor to determine how many positions it takes to fill a single protective service post for a single shift, taking into account vacation, sick leave, training days, and other types of leave, since we were on a 24/7 operation. The 2015 legislature approved the current NDOC shift relief factor rates of 1.7 for a 7-day per week post and a 1.21 for a 5-day per week post. We welcome legislators to tour our facilities to learn more about our operations, facilities, designs, and mission. The foundation of our budget starts with the completion of the JFA 10-year prison population projection. These projections, along with our capacity analysis report, influence our biennium housing plans and female and male long-term housing plans. When our leadership team came on board in the past few months, we realized that the NDOC failed to submit an updated biennium housing plan with the governor's recommended budget. We are working with an updated to update the biennium plans and long-term housing plans with the final JFA report, and will work with your fiscal staff and the governor's finance office to review the report in greater detail and the implications that this has on our overall operations over the 23-25 biennium. We did, however, submit the capacity report to the governor's recommended budget, which shows our institutions and facilities ending bed balance, taking into consideration the growth in our population based on the JFA. The preliminary bed balance shows that we would be, in fact, have sufficient enough beds at the end of both years of the 23-25 biennium for both male and female populations, which are indicated in the red circle on the slide. However, we must go deeper and understand what kind of beds we will have available in our institutions and facilities, and if it matches the classification and custody of the types of offenders we'll house in our institutions. In our department, we have several custody levels that we project into the future based upon the JFA projections. These include minimum, medium, closed, and max beds. Based on our preliminary review of our draft biennium housing plan, we are anticipating seeing our close custody beds dip into the negative over the 23-25 biennium. Additionally, the governor's recommended budget includes one of the largest CIP programs to date, and the NDOC has nearly $90 million allocated. At this time, we are incorporating the impact of all the CIP projects to our biennium housing plan. We will be updating our biennium plan with the updated JFA projections from the final report, and may propose the phased reopening of the Warm Springs Correctional Center in order to accommodate our close custody bed shortages. The CIP bed movement that is necessary, and also other factors that once we execute our HR strategies and with our vitally needed staff in each of our departments. This is another representation of our male bed balances at each point, taking into consideration our population. We are anticipating enough female beds over the next 23-25 biennium. I'll now pass this presentation over to Deputy Director Shea, who will take us through the department's budget that is recommended by the governor's overall in the 23-25 biennium.
Thank you, Director. Good morning, Chair Harris. Good morning, Chair Watts, and members of the Joint Subcommittee on Public Safety, Natural Resources, and Transportation. My name is Christina Shea, and I'm the Deputy Director of Support Services for the Nevada Department of Corrections. First, I wanted to express my gratitude to your staff, particularly Mr. Malone and the staff of the Governor's Finance Office, for their incredible help during our transition, so thank you for that. The Governor's recommended budget includes funding for the Nevada Department of Corrections, totaling roughly $399.3 million in fiscal year '24 and $406 million in fiscal year '25 over our 30 budget accounts. As the pie chart depicts, the department is primarily funded through general fund appropriations, totaling roughly 87%, and 10% through other funds, which includes grant funds, prison industry revenue, inmate welfare funds, and internal transfers at 3%. The governor's recommended budget over the 23-25 biennium primarily funds our medium, closed, maximum, and minimum security operations, which is roughly 69%. 15% is allocated to healthcare services, an additional 9% to inmate services, including banking and commissary services. 2% is for human resources, another 2% for fiscal services, 2% for prison industries, and finally 1% is internal investigations. At the Nevada Department of Corrections, we are facing a staffing shortage, which is depicted through this historical vacancy chart, that tracks our vacancies at the end of each fiscal year for the past decade. The department historically has been able to maintain a fairly stable level of vacancies over time. However, as you can see in 2022, the department experienced a significant spike in vacancies, which has been steadily increasing and has hit an all-time high at roughly 900 vacancies department-wide. Many factors have impacted the high vacancy rates, including the COVID-19 pandemic, the retirement of employees statewide, and issues relating recruitment and retention of our employees. This table provides more detail into which budget accounts and institutions are experiencing the highest vacancy rates. Currently, Lovelock Correctional Center is experiencing a 45% vacancy rate. Northern Nevada Correctional Center is at 41% vacancy rate. Ely State Prison is at 41%. The prison medical budget is experiencing a 33% vacancy rate. Correctional programs is at 32%, and the director's office is at 23% vacancies. These vacancies are impacting our human resources, our operations, and vital areas of our department. This slide shows our current authorized FTE for sworn officers department-wide. As you can see, our correctional lieutenants and correctional sergeants are experiencing relatively stable vacancies. However, our senior correctional officers are experiencing a 17% vacancy rate, and also our correctional officers are experiencing a 39% vacancy rate department-wide. One aspect of our HR strategy is to address the large vacancy rates department-wide is through Decision Unit E673, which was developed by the Governor's Office and is proposed to address an immediate and critical need for first-line public safety officers and correctional officers that have been consistently facing vacancies in excess of 20% over the past biennia. The Governor's recommended budget over the 23-25 biennium includes general fund appropriations of $13.8 million in fiscal year 24 and $14.3 million in fiscal year 25 for a 2-grade pay increase for correctional officers, senior correctional officers, and correctional sergeants. Furthermore, as part of our HR strategy, the department has identified areas for process improvements, as currently we are experiencing delays in our hiring process. First, we are going to review existing processes for bottlenecks within the agency and create efficient and effective systems that can streamline HR department-wide. Additionally, we want to explore marketing and advertising strategies, innovative ways that may be implemented by other states to address staffing shortages, and partner with state and local agencies and elected officials to come up with creative solutions. We must execute on our HR strategies to stabilize our current operations department-wide, which is our primary goal as a leadership team. The Governor's recommended budget includes a capital improvement program, which is the largest that we've seen over the past biennia. As part of the CIP program, the Governor is recommending funding of $90.3 million for the Nevada Department of Correction projects that are needed to maintain our aging infrastructure statewide. Historically, the Nevada Department of Corrections has received a good portion of the CIP program projects based on deferred maintenance and the nature of our operations. The CIP projects are vital to the safe functioning of our operations. In addition, the projects do have an impact on our capacity analysis, on our operations, and our biennium housing plans as we close housing units, reopen housing units, and complete projects that are approved by the legislature. We will be reviewing our biennium plan to be sure we take into consideration the impact that the 21 proposed CIP projects, the 21 current approved projects and the 23 proposed CIP projects would have on our available bed capacity. Now I want to move on to going into each of the budget accounts as recommended by the Governor. So budget account 3710, the Director's Office. The Director's Office functions as the department's administrative and management division, including offender management, transportation, Office of the Inspector General, the information technology, human resources, and fiscal services. The Governor's recommended budget includes the following funding related to the Director's Office budget over the 23-25 biennium. Nearly $30.6 million in funding for fiscal year 24, $30.4 million in funding for fiscal year 25, 190.51 FTE for each year in the 23-25 biennium, the E673 funding decision unit for the 2-grade salary increase, which is roughly $335,313 in fiscal year 24, and $343,704 in fiscal year 25. Additionally, there's funding in one-shots, roughly $5.1 million for fiscal year 24, which would fund computer hardware and software upgrades. Moving on to budget account 3716, this is Warm Springs Correctional Center. It's a male medium custody facility located in Carson City. The governor recommended budget includes the following funding related to Warm Springs over the 23-25 biennium. $13.4 million in funding for fiscal year 24, and $13.9 million in funding for fiscal year 25, 119 FTE for each year in the 23-25 biennium, the E673 funding for the 2-grade salary increase, which is roughly $738,062 in fiscal year 24, and $772,037 in fiscal year 25, and additionally a one-shot for $267,281 to fund replacement equipment. On December 16, 2022, the department made the decision to temporarily close down Warm Springs Correctional Center due to concerns with safety and security of our offenders and staff. The reason to temporarily shut down Warm Springs Correctional Center was primarily due to large vacancies. The employees from Warm Springs have been temporarily reassigned to Northern Nevada Correctional Center. However, we still have some employees that are delayed in the PCN transfer process due to HR vacancies within our department. We are working on completing these transfers and will do so as soon as possible. One of the primary factors that needs to be reviewed prior to advising if we can keep Warm Springs Correctional Center temporarily closed down over the 23-25 biennium is the update to our biennium housing plan, which we are currently finalizing with the JFA projections. Once this report is complete, the NDOC can meet with the Governor's Finance Office and the Legislative Council Bureau's Fiscal Analysis staff to discuss a plan. The primary analysis may show that we need the available bed space at Warm Springs Correctional Center. However, we must first hire vital staff prior to a possible phased reopening process. Moving on to Ely Conservation Camp, budget account 3747. Ely Conservation Camp is a minimum custody population dormitory style facility in Ely. The governor's recommended budget includes a decision unit E225, which would permanently close down and reduce the budget by $1.3 million in fiscal year 24, and a further reduction of $1.3 million in fiscal year 25. And if this decision unit is approved by the legislature, it would fund ECC in mothball status, which would be $179,036 in fiscal year 24 and $182,712 in fiscal year 25. The department temporarily closed down Ely Conservation Camp in 2022 due to staffing shortages at Ely State Prison. During this time, staff were transferred from Ely Conservation Camp to Ely State Prison, as well as the modified fire camp operations. We currently have one FTE that we are still working on transferring and will do so prior to the end of this fiscal year. Decision Unit E225, as recommended by the governor, would permanently close down ECC over the 23-25 biennium and fund the facility in mothball status, which would fund utility costs, maintenance contracts, and other necessary costs. The Nevada Department of Corrections had a meeting with the Nevada Division of Forestry, the Governor's Finance Office, and the Governor's Office to discuss the long-term operations of the fire camp program given the decline in our minimum custody offenders due to AB 236 of the 2019 session. Although the long-term planning is still being discussed and prepared jointly by the Nevada Department of Corrections and the Nevada Division of Forestry, there is no plan or need to reopen ECC in the future. Therefore, the recommendation is to fund ECC in mothball status at this time. The Nevada Division of State Lands and the BLM have a lease related to the Ely Conservation Camp. The lease requires the removal of all infrastructure and equipment upon termination of the lease and restore the landscape to a natural state, and patent requires reversion if the property is not used for correctional purposes for 5 consecutive years or upon termination. The Nevada Department of Corrections stopped using the facility in July 2022, so therefore we are anticipating a possible fiscal impact in fiscal year 26 for the return of this land to the BLM. We are working with the Governor's Finance Office and also your staff to come up with solutions for the 23-25 biennium related to the reversion of this back to BLM. Moving on to Ely State Prison, budget account 3751. Ely State Prison is a male minimum, maximum, and closed custody institution located in Ely. The governor's recommended budget includes funding of $28.9 million in fiscal year 24 and $30 million in fiscal year 25. 284 FTE for each year in the 23-25 biennium. Again, the E673 funding for the two-grade salary increase, which is $1.7 million in fiscal year '24 and $1.8 million in fiscal year '25. Additionally, one-shots totaling $422,000 to fund increased security equipment and officer safety equipment. In March of 2022, the Nevada Department of Corrections and the Nevada Department of Forestry implemented a plan which brought the NDF qualified minimum security inmate workers back to Ely. The Nevada Department of Corrections is housing these inmates workers in Building 12 at ESP. Currently, Building 12 is limited to a maximum of 30 inmate workers due to space limitations. Since March of 2022, the Nevada Department of Corrections has provided an average of 16 inmate workers staffing one full NDF fire crew or 2 project squads. The Nevada Department of Corrections is working with the Nevada Department of Forestry and the Governor's Finance Office to assess the sustainability of these modified fire crew operations at Ely State Prison. At this time, we are working on a long-term plan with NDF and the Governor's Finance Office. Moving on to budget account 3754, the Tonopah Conservation Camp. Tonopah Conservation Camp is a male minimum custody facility located in Tonopah. The governor's recommended budget includes funding of $1.8 million in fiscal year '24 and $1.9 million in fiscal year '25, funding of 13 FTE for each year in the biennia, and again, the E673 decision unit to fund a two-grade salary increase of $90,174 in fiscal year '24 and $93,765 in fiscal year '25. In November 2022, the Nevada Department of Corrections temporarily closed down TCC due to safety and security concerns. All the offenders were transferred to the PH Conservation Camp. However, the department has retained the positions at TCC in order to make sure the facility is secure and protect state property until the facility can be mothballed. After the meeting with the Nevada Department of Corrections and Nevada Department of Forestry and the Governor's Finance Office on March 1st, the Tonopah Conservation Camp is recommended to remain closed during the 23-25 biennium. We will work with your fiscal staff to determine the appropriate funding needed to mothball the facility and provide funding for a time period for the current employees to transfer into other NDOC positions or find other employment opportunities. On behalf of the staff and the leadership team at the Nevada Department of Corrections, thank you for your consideration and thank you for your service.
Thank you very much to your team for the thorough presentation. Appreciate the candor and honesty in the responses, and I think I appreciate you going through all the budgets that we have. So I think we have. We're going to go through and kind of try and address this in a few different pieces. So I think there will be some questions kind of department-wide, and then I'll try and guide the members through, and we'll ask questions about, I think we'll have some specific to some of the institutions' budgets that you went through. So we'll start with some of the kind of larger department-wide issues, and I think you described some of the factors, both some of the legislation as well as the pandemic that have impacted the offender population and some of the projections moving forward. One of the questions that I had is, what's the department's plan to manage staffing levels and facility operations if the actual offender levels significantly vary from the JFA projections, either below or above?
This is James Arenda for the record. Well, if the projections are actually too high and they're actually lower, it's actually, honestly, will be easy for me to do. And what we technically do when our population goes down, we try to safely close certain housing areas and institutions to lower the number of offenders in the institutions if our population numbers go down, which allows me to reduce the numbers of staff needed to operate the facility. So that's easy. The issue is what happens when we go above. If we go above the projections and we have more, our population goes higher than 2% a year, then we're going to be in more trouble and we need to get more creative of what we do. So what we do is we start looking at our posting plan. Is there anything that we can do that can reduce our current posting, whether we can assign law enforcement officers to do our outside hospital trips, whether we can do our hospital stays, which requires a 2 officer to 1 offender out in the hospitals. assigning that to non-correctional staff, which could be retired police officers or retired correctional officers. That can reduce the number of correctional officers that we have needed to run the operations, which we can move inside. With the actual population, there's other things that we're doing for alternatives to segregation, which does play an impact on the violent levels and our capacity beds. When offenders misbehave, they go to higher level bed space, like our close custody. They go from minimum to close custody where we don't have bed space, which also the higher the level of security of offender means more staffing needed to run the operations. So having alternatives to segregation like wireless devices, more programming, things that can actually change behaviors, can actually reduce those that are getting misbehavior disciplinary action, which will release those or prevent those from going to higher level institutions or higher level classifications. That's a tactic to be able to utilize to reduce the numbers of staff needed in a facility. So that's something we do that probably no one even realizes we do. We try to control where the offenders are being placed in the population in classification levels, because lower the classification level means less of staff we needed to operate. So that's another tactic. The other thing we do is we try to we really look at each facility and determine the vacancy rates at each facility to determine what is appropriate levels that we can reduce one facility to move to another. So if our population goes up and we watch what happens with our human resources and our staffing. If the staffing doesn't change, the facility that has the highest vacancy rate, we move those offenders, close units at that facility to move them to other facilities, which will increase the staffing at the other facilities, but not as dramatic increase in safety and security. So there are still tactics we got. It all depends on how high of a rate that we go above what's the 2.0 JFA projection, and hopefully they're either right or they're wrong in the wrong direction, and we go, our population does decrease. Me personally, I do believe that we're going to see a decrease in our population based upon how we're doing our programs, reentry, and what we do to the offenders to make sure we change behaviors and send them back with the right tools in the community, because that's what actually does reduce victimization in our community and reduces recidivism, which will help with our population numbers.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that, and glad to hear the commitment to the Department of Corrections focusing on corrections. Senator Goicoechea?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a couple of questions, and the JFA inmate projections, you're anticipating a 2% increase, and you will be able to manage that. And again, I'm really focused on the honor camps and where we're headed with them. Now, do those inmates still get two days for every day served if you're in a conservation camp?
So James Renner for the record, yes. And the problem with the conservation camps and this goes back even to the AB 236, our numbers of minimum security population is continuously decreasing. And when you talk about AB 236, there's less offenders in those classifications of minimum security actually coming into the institution now because there's alternatives to incarceration, there's changes from Class B to Class C felonies. All these things play an effect on our minimum security, because if we're not getting in the lower level, low sentences, which are our minimum securities, then those populations start eventually going away. And that's the issue that's going to be affecting our camps, is the number of minimum securities that we have.
And again, as we're looking at this, you need the personnel to supervise them. I understand that, but is there any ability there to maybe we raise the threshold? I know if I was serving time, I believe I'd definitely be looking for 2 days for every day I served, because I'd want out, and it just seems like it would we would be able to shift more even, and I realize you have guidelines on what level of inmate can be there, but can you shift that up a little bit? Or I'm just trying to figure out how we can maintain our Division of Forestry and the good those conservation camps do for the community, and I see you're looking at about 300 inmates a year. Well, clearly 5 camps will handle that. We've got 9 camps. I'm very concerned about the total impact to the state by closing those camps.
James Renner, for the record, I completely understand 100%, and I agree with you. There's a balance between safety, security, and the classification levels. Yes, we could potentially lower our thresholds for those going into minimums. We could give some mediums the opportunity to go into minimums, but there's a level that we have to look at for safety and security with putting the wrong offenders out there. We still, even having the classification of minimums that we put in the camps now, we still have problems. We have fights, we have assaults, we have drugs, we have weapons, we have cell phone contrabands. And when you start increasing the level to go out into these camps, that increases also the violence and everything. So it's a balance. And the last thing I would ever want to see is those camps completely go away, because I know the impact it'll have on the forestry and the fire conservation and the state. And I'm trying to find ways of doing this. I don't know if there's an out with it. When I left here in 2019, we had 1,100 inmates that were either in the conservation camps or on the waiting list to get in. Today, we barely hit 300, and that's not going to end. That's going to keep going down. We get offenders coming in our door the same day from the jail systems that are eligible for parole, actually when the day they get there, which has never happened before. So we're having, and also what I have to weigh out is medical and mental health in the camps, because there's, even if you're minimum security in our facilities, there's certain medical issues, like if you have allergies to bees, if you have allergies to something that you're working on, smoke, you can't go into these camps. So it also, medical, mental health, believe it or not, affects our minimums that can actually be eligible for the camp. So it is a balance, and I am hoping that we do find a way to be able to keep them open, but I'm not too confident we can.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Senator Harris.
Thank you so much, Chair Watts. Can you just briefly discuss how some of the staffing vacancies have impacted program opportunities for offenders throughout the state's facilities? And then I'll have another question after that.
James Renner, for the record, they dramatically affect programs. When you look at a balance, most of our facilities that are in the rural areas like Ely and Ely and Lovelock, we're almost every day at our minimum staffing levels. What happens when you're at minimum or go below minimum, you got to shut down areas. Now you have to weigh out, what do you shut down? We obviously can't shut down the housing units unless we lock them down. Without locking down, what gets shut down next, or right before that, is programs. Programs, anytime you reduce the number of programs and reduce the times that programs meet, or directly affects our reentry, it directly affects our population violence, it affects everything. Programs are necessary. However, you can't have an effective program without having effective security. So it all plays a part of each other. And yes, our vacancy rates are affecting our programs and our reentry, which eventually comes back, could hurt recidivism.
Thank you. My next question is about the projections in population increase. I know you didn't do the projections yourself. We have a third party do that. But is there any information behind why we're estimating that it's just going to continue to grow? Are we going to get better at catching folks? Are they anticipating creating new crimes? Do you know what the driver is?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Chair Harris. This is Christina Shea for the record. They use a complex wizard methodology. There's a report, it's actually right here. It's 100 and something pages long, and it takes into consideration the population increases, the crime rates, what they're seeing for any particular period of time, and projecting it over the course of a 10-year average. In general, the reports are looking at, they have a calculation that they do to see how close their projection was, and they disclose that information to the governor's finance office. So it's a pretty complex calculation, and GFA has been doing it for a very long time. I hope that was helpful.
maybe I'll have to read the 100 and something pages to figure out what it is that they think is not just one, but usually there's something that's going to be a main driver or two or three factors, right? Out of the hundreds that they may consider. And if it was population, I'd feel a bit better than if it was, some other less desirable indication. So thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Assemblyman Hafen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a couple questions, if that's okay. One, Ms. Shea, I appreciate you bringing up the Division of Forestry and trying to meet the statutory requirements. Could you just give us an update when you get one? Hopefully, we're still in session, but I'd like to stay in the loop of how those conversations are going, so we know how it is. Because I do echo Senator Gocachia's concerns with closing the conservation camps. And trying to meet our statutory requirements that we have. Could you also touch on the strategies at the top of the department's priorities to improve retention and recruitment, and what additional resources are needed to implement those strategies?
Thank you for the question, Assemblyman Hafen. Christina Shea for the record. So the first response, yes, I'll work with your staff and make sure that you're included on anything with NDF, the meetings and all that. So I'm committed to making sure you're aware, in the loop. The question regarding HR strategies, I think at this point, we're in discovery process going into our agency to determine what the bottlenecks are. Right now, we're seeing processes, from a new candidate coming into the department taking upwards of 2 to 3 months versus 2 to 3 weeks. So we're trying to find bottlenecks in our own internal processes, as well as trying to come up with creative solutions around marketing and advertising. If there's a way for us to do some campaigns there, looking at strategies where we can determine how people hear about our work. We also want to work with DHRM to make sure that we have a lot of new staff in our HR department who don't necessarily haven't been with the department for a long time, and so working with DHRM to get the training that the staff need and making sure Smart 21, we understand the implications and the work with that. So that's our primary focus, is mainly on our internal efficiencies, so that when we do have people who want to join, they can join as quickly as possible and help with our staffing shortage.
All right, next we'll go to Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wanted to kind of expand a little bit more on those staff shortages. We see them in all departments. So if we're going to be talking to constituents, or maybe it's some school-aged children, what kind of requirements are you looking for someone who's wanting to fill some of these positions? Are they 4-year degrees? Is it a special academy, maybe a certificate program? Thank you.
So James Arenda for the record, we only require a GED or high school equivalency. Right, currently, to be an actual correction officer, it's 21 years old in accordance to post requirements. However, we do hire less than 21 as trainees. And we're looking, right now, part of our HR strategies is to come up with some alternatives to hire contingencies. Like if we'll hire you as long as you've passed a 1-day background, and then we will hire you, and then in the long run, if you don't pass the physical fitness, the weapons, all the certification, then you can't be a correction officer. But we're looking at ways of hiring as contingencies so that we can actually lock people in. Because what happens when these candidates start looking for jobs, they're not just applying for corrections. They shotgun all over the state, the counties, the cities. They take what first comes to them, and I don't want to lose those opportunities to miss those candidates. So if there's ways that I could get them in contingencies or lower the levels until they reach the post certification criteria of age and physicals, I am going to try to figure a way to do that, which I'm pretty certain I can, just to lock in those individuals. And what Deputy Director Shea was talking about, the process taking too long, is the same reason. You have a shotgun approach of these jobs. They find jobs that either pay more, and we could have hired them, but it took too long. We can't do that. It's got to be quick, it's got to be easy, and we got to be able to figure it out to get more creative, and we are gonna.
Okay, thank you so much for that answer. I just kind of want to get a little bit more details on the background checks. Obviously, we want people who are not having their own records, trying to, police people. But say you've got a kid that's in high school, they've done some stupid stuff. Maybe it's graffiti or got caught smoking marijuana. Could you explain a little bit about your background checks?
Sure. James Renda for the record. When I was talking about the quick background check is we do what's called an NCIC check, and it really just checks to determine if you have any warrants out there, if you have arrest history. The whole background check takes into consideration of issues that you might have had in the past. How long ago, your age. Well, first of all, if they're in high school, those charges are not going to be disclosed in our background checks. But when you have someone that does have a history, it does go under consideration. Post is also a big part of determining whether or not the background check clears, because they have certain criteria of what the background is. But I do have an override potential on my end where if I believe the incident happened 10, 20 years ago, which hits a objective rejection, I can override it to say that, time has gone, the person has been a good individual in the community, and be able to override it. But we really do rely on the backgrounds when post comes into play, because they really determine the overall classification and criteria for employment for peace officer, and that's where it struggles with myself.
Thank you very much for that elaboration.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I've actually got two questions. And the first one you might have already answered, but the construction kind of jarred me a few times, so I might have missed out on it. Are there any sort of consideration at this time of any additional items that could be temporarily closed based upon the staffing item that you're thinking about? And if there are any facilities that are being considered at this time, what is the timeline for that?
So James Renda for the record. I've brought up in the past about other camps. Camps is really the only locations that we're looking at potentials. And we are meeting, like was mentioned, with the governor's finance office, LCB staff, and the NDF staff to try to determine what's the best approach to help my needs, the staffing needs, the vacancies, but also the NDF and the conservation needs. But there is still discussions going on right now. I don't believe there is any closure that's in the immediate, but it could change very quickly depending on our staffing numbers. Our vacancies continue to go up day by day, and it really does.
And thank you. And then I do have a second question, if I could, not related to this item. I'm not sure exactly where it would fit. When it comes to the commissary, is that a consistent pricing across all of the areas? And then also, what is the markup on those items? And then finally, I know that there are some families that also deposit money into those accounts. What account is that put into, and how much of the budget would you say comes from family deposits for the commissaries?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Anderson. Christina Shea for the record. I just coming back to the department in the last month. I need to wrap myself around this account. Just to give you the overall, it goes into a trust account. It's a 6,900 account. I think that's the number of it. And then our inmate banking services oversees it. As far as the markup, I have a report that I've been reviewing over time, and I can provide that to your staff. That shows the markup. And can you please, if there was another question in there,
Yes, how much does the family donations or the family putting money into those trust accounts actually make up for that account?
Thank you, Christina Shea for the record. I'll provide that also in the follow-up with your staff.
Thank you so much, and I know that was kind of out of the blue and not in this, so thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Members, additional questions? Senator Goicoechea?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the indulgence. I'm going to get just a little bit off, but in the past we had a program. It was for prison industries, and it was an advisory board committee that was comprised of the private sector and some legislators. I sat on it for a while. I believe there's other people in with relationships on this. What happened to that program? It was really, I thought it was really beneficial, both the inmates, the programs, the legislature, and the private sector. And I think I don't know whether it was COVID related, we moved away from it, but we just, we haven't been meeting. So just curious where that was at, and I thought it was a good interaction.
James Renda, for the record, I remember it too, and I think it was an important process that we had in place. That was a legislative change that moved it. I'm not sure the reasons behind it, and I literally just found that out about 3 weeks ago as well, and I did think that was a good thing, having it in place.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I believe that we actually went to judiciary then, is kind of providing the oversight on it, but I think it was a little better unit when it was, i.e. private sector and selected legislators. I think the process worked very well, and it brought the legislature. Maybe it's something we need to look at reinstituting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So I think we're about to move on, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page, I think we look forward to once the housing plan gets finalized. We look forward to seeing that. A summary of kind of the conversations with forestry and what the overarching plan is for conservation camps and the collaboration on firefighting, and then the commissary information. I did have just a couple quick questions. So, Director, you mentioned during the presentation that there are more serious offenders, and I think you talked about kind of the ratios. And so I understand that we've seen a decline in the minimum security population. So I just wanted to get some clarification. Are you seeing that as kind of on a percentage basis, on a nominal basis, with just a higher overall number of more serious offenders, or is it both?
James Renda, for the record, it's both. And that's why the Sentencing Commission is probably the best one to bring this up with the data that they do, because it will even show what type of population's coming in. It's more of it was presented in one of the other committees, these sex crimes and more violent crimes are the ones that actually coming into the doors. So it's the overall, and the ratio is actually going up in violent crimes. Thank you for that. One of the questions that I had kind of at a high level in terms of vacancies, housing, the units, so you've talked about some of the shifts that are made, including, sometimes closing down housing units and consolidating. Does that ever result in, essentially bunking up and other things that are less than ideal housing conditions for the population in order to make it work? James Arenda, for the record, not in this department right this time, but I mean, that's a strategy they do statewide in other states, depending on if they run out of actual beds. I don't see our problem with running out of beds. It's really our staffing is the issue, but I don't foresee any of that ever happening, what you're talking about with housing and gymnasiums and overflow areas. I don't foresee it, and hopefully I'm right. Thank you for that. I just wanted to make sure that as we're looking at this, even with us being below capacity, that because of our staffing capacity, we're not creating situations where the housing is inappropriate for the population. The last question I had goes to that staffing capacity. So obviously we're familiar with the major recommendations in the governor's recommended budget. We've talked to some other departments as well, and heard that hopefully it will stop the bleeding, but sometimes we're still looking at significant differences between where we'll end up at the end of these cost of living adjustments, and even for officers, those two-step increases, and competing positions in the private sector, in other state agencies in some cases, and with local government. So can you give your best estimation of where we're going to be at in terms of just having these positions be financially viable for recruitment? To how much of a dent do we think we're going to be able to make in some of these really high vacancy levels with what is on the table right now? So James Renner, for the record, the two-step is going to make a big impact. I mean, anytime You hear from correction officers on their exit interviews why they went to Las Vegas Metro or why they go to a corrections facility in a different county. The majority of it is over what they're taking home for pay, whether it's the having more money coming in or less money going to PERS. It's always been the benefit, the number one factor. However, a factor that we never really are looking at that I think is going to be a big factor is staff wellness. When you look at having staff that even if they're underpaid or not taking a lot home, the wellness in part of that employment is a big deal. If we can come up with ways, which we are through our new HR strategies, which trying to do our wellness better for our staff to make sure that they're first of all, that we're proud of the staff that we have, that we're team, where it's a team effort. They survive, I survive. They fail, I fail. It has to be something that the staff really understand that we're there for them, and the wellness part I think is going to also keep staff from leaving on the attrition side. So putting all this together and trying to come up with recruiting strategies and getting even companies out there to help, I think is going to be a big deal. And I think this is going to be our worst coming up by the summer. Usually summertime we lose a lot more staff traditionally, but I think right after that, I think we're going to start. If we initiate our HR initiatives, I really do believe we're going to see the end of the year is going to be a dramatic change to the best in our interest.
Thank you for that, Director. Please do keep us posted. And again, hopefully as we get to some of these positions, there'll be less of that essentially required overtime, going back to the concept of wellness and taking some of the pressure off of the existing officers and staff. The Department of Public Safety has provided us with some information. I think your department probably has in the past as well. But, I think it would be helpful for us to understand, at least anecdotally, where some folks are leaving to go to. You mentioned, for example, the local police departments, and understanding after we make these increases, what's that difference going to be, so that we can kind of understand, again, what's that landscape going to look like as folks consider making those decisions. With that, I think we will move on to a discussion about Ely State Prison. And I think the first question that we have is from Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. And I actually have a few. Do you want them all at once, like rapid fire, or would you rather have it one at a time? Let's just do them all at once then. So has the department been able to manage the offender population safety and effectively with the continued closure of those 3 housing units? And then the other, has there been any consideration or under what circumstances would you consider opening one of those?
So James Render for the record, what we do monitor is our facilities' violent rates or disciplinary action rates. So anytime you close a unit down like at Ely, move them to High Desert, does it increase the violent rates at High Desert? We've been monitoring that, and I would think it would, but it didn't. When we moved them, our institutional disciplinary boards they're steady. That we have not seen a dramatic increase when we're moving beds over, especially when I looked at the one we moved Ely over to High Desert and northern Nevada. So lowering the numbers doesn't technically mean that we're going to have lower violence. Moving the numbers and then higher doesn't necessarily mean that you do higher numbers. What we did with Ely is when you closed housing units, which there's 3 closed today, we literally moved those that we thought were the best behaved out of there, so it didn't have the impact on the receiving facility. So that's really why the violence or the incident rate stayed pretty consistent at Ely, because those that were causing the issues were still there. The ones that weren't causing the issues is what we moved out, and we didn't see the increase in that. So we do look at that and we do monitor it. And we're not ashamed to say we made a mistake. If violence goes up in another facility from what we saw, what we moved, we reverse what we did, because our violent rates and our incident rates is number one concern for us.
Thank you. So if I'm understanding, it has more to do with the behaviors and the interaction of how some people work with each other, as opposed to this is just staffing, period.
James Renner for the record, that is correct.
Thank you. Senator Goicoechea.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, for just a quick follow-up on that. Now, you've got 3 housing units closed there, but you are using one as kind of a minimum security, I believe, to supply at least a couple of crews. Is there the ability, or would there the ability, you already got the facility maybe to open one of those other housing units is closed? Presently, I think we've got 30 inmates in that one, but could you use a couple of those and then like expand the camp program, which would fill a need in northeastern Nevada? And considering staffing, I know what the staffing issues are in Ely and it's tough. So I'm just curious, is that a thought that might
James
happen?
Arenda for the record, and you don't want to do that, because if I was able to open a housing unit with the number of staff inside that it operates to run that unit, it would be less staff to reopen Ely CC. The housing unit that you're talking about, that we moved the NDF offenders in there, is not inside the perimeter of the facility. So it's one housing unit that has minimum security, that do all of our outside grounds and go outside, so it's less staff needed. It's really only one staff. It doesn't require perimeters and escorts that you would if you were on the inside. So it would cost more money for us to open up a maximum security housing unit for low security minimum offenders.
I thank you for that. I knew you had some closed units. I knew you had a crew there, but I didn't realize it was outside the fence. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, and I think we'll probably shortly talk about the Ely Conservation Camp again and get into some of that. But first, Chair Harris.
Thank you, Chair. I just have some questions while I've got you about some operations at Ely State Prison. Is death row still under lockdown there?
James Arenda for the record, as far as I know from yesterday, it is not, but I have to get back to you on it. They had a serious incident that they were redoing all their procedures, and they were remaining on not full lockdown, but semi-lockdown status until those procedures have changed. The best I could do is provide an update on that, and as far as I know, they're not, but I don't want to say that perfectly clear because I got to check.
Okay. If in addition to that information, if you could follow up with any info on the last time that they had any yard time and the last time that they were able to shower, that'd be great too, so that I can have that information, and I'd love to have that on the record. I think traditionally it's every 72 hours, but I've been hearing that it's more like a week at this point. So I want to just get some information about when's the last time these folks have been able to shower, have yard time, whether they're still on lockdown, and if they are, what the plan is to make sure that they have the basic kind of human needs that we all have. Thank you.
Thank you.
James Arenda for the record, I'll just,
Go ahead.
yes, we're going to follow up on that. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Members, any additional questions on Ely State Prison? Seeing none, again, I know on our agenda we have the Warm Springs Correctional Center next, but because of some of the interrelated issues with the housing of the conservation program at the prison and the long-term plans for the conservation camp, I think we're going to go next to the Ely Conservation Camp. And first I'll see Senator Goycochea if there's anything that you want to ask about this budget account.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I kind of, because I am so close to the Ely camp, I probably think I know a lot of the answers, but for the committee, I mean, are you going to continue to operate it? Well, I think the bottom line is, you're forecasting that, no, you're going to close it. And I really believe the camp is, in the mothball status, has deteriorated somewhat. And I guess my one question is, that must be an RPP, Recreation Public Purpose Facility. That's why you have, after 5 years, then you're going to have to go back. It sounds like we're probably headed there with the Ely camp. I mean, there's no use mincing words. Let's just talk about it.
So James Arenda for the record, that is correct. But the issue of why it's semi-mothballed now, we do have one staff member that still is assigned over there, and the reason why is not only just for vandalism. But we don't have fiber optics going into Ely State Prison yet. So all our communications comes out of ECC. So when we have radio communications, there's a base that comes out of ECC that actually controls that. We're in the process of moving all that over to Ely State Prison. You can't tear it down or close it right now because we still have communications out of ECC. And also we don't want it to get vandalized. We left it, when they first left the facility, prior to my arrival, they were vandalized. I believe NDF was robbed about $80,000 worth of equipment out of there. So it's something that we have to monitor, is the reason why we still have a staff member assigned there.
Just a quick follow-up on that. You've got fiber to Ely State Prison.
James Renda, for the record, my belief is that they can't connect the communication system through that at this time, which is why it's still at ECC.
All right, thank you, because I know the state fiber does get to Ely State Prison, or at least I thought it did. So I'm just curious about that. I thought you actually had a fiber line into the prison where I can understand maybe the communication side. That would be just radio and microwave, I assume. All right, and again, like I say, at some point, it sounds like we are going to close Ely State Prison down, and I hope we can really take a long, hard look at either expanding what's available at Ely State Prison, or we continue to get a bigger void. As we talk about the honor camps, you need to understand, we've got Pioches functioning right now. If Tonopah's going away, technically we've really got Cardin. Wells is iffy. Humboldt is iffy. There's a lot of Nevada that isn't going to have any protection out there, I'm sorry, or assistance. I shouldn't say protection, but assistance, especially in the fires, and just for the committee.
Thank you for that, Senator. And I'd like to follow up on this. And again, I think some of this will also can be provided in the follow-up on the ongoing conversations with the Division of Forestry. But yeah, so again, just to make sure that we're all kind of clear about the plan, and I think we did get some clarity in the presentation. So it looks like we're mothballing for now, but based on the projections and everything, we're really looking at downsizing the number of camps, that Ely is essentially going to be shut down, that we're going to restore it to its natural state in compliance with the RPP lease with the BLM. And then, at least for this biennium, the plan is to continue that maximum 30 within that available unit at Ely State Prison to do some conservation work. What is the thought moving forward? Is it going to be that we're just going to, again, keep just that 30? Are we going to look at, moving that to Pioche? What's kind of the overall plan in that area for that conservation program, since we're looking at shutting down the Ely Conservation Camp long term?
So James Renda, for the record, the last meeting we had with NDF is that there's really no training facility for those that are currently at Ely to be able to train in, so it's really just housing. They stage there, house there, that are already trained. They don't do the training there. They'll do their training somewhere else. If we keep them open, they would have to do the same thing, train them at a different camp and then move them into there, because there's no training ability for NDF to train them there.
Thank you for that. So again, I think as we're looking at this kind of consolidation and operations modification, we look forward to getting some additional information on kind of, I think we've got a decent grasp on it for this biennium, but also trying to understand where we're going longer term based on some of these changes in population, and again, what's the geographic distribution as well, to try and make sure that we can respond as best as possible with the resources that we have. Members, are there any other questions on the Ely Conservation Camp? Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Thank you, Chair. I was looking through my notes, and it looks like the U.S. Bureau of Land Management for the property, there cannot be a lapse of more than 5 years for it. What is that date?
James Renda, for the record, 2025, I believe, is Ely.
Yeah, July 2025, which would be 26.
July 2025 is the actual 5-year date.
Mr. Chair, if I'm, but again, because you do have technically staff there, you could probably, it's a little gray, right? I just want to clarify that. I don't know how that would work, but you definitely have it staffed today. Somebody's living at the camp, so is it in operation or not? I don't think the BLM would be in any hurry to bounce it, but I guess I'm saying if it's a long-term plan, probably the quicker we move, the better.
Thank you. All right, anything else on this one? All right, seeing none, let's talk a little bit about Warm Springs Correctional Center. I believe we have a question from Assemblywoman Dickman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. Thank you for the work you do. We know it's challenging. And you've talked about this a little bit, but I wondered if you could talk a little more about what operational and safety benefits have been experienced from your decision to close Warm Springs?
James Renda, for the record, first of all, it was not my decision to close it, but
Okay, that is it.
so anyway, what happened when they did temporarily shut down Warm Springs, it allowed the staff that were over at the Northern Nevada Correctional Center to get some relief in overtime. We're even moving all the staff over from Warm Springs over to Northern Nevada. They are still short correction officers. So that's how bad the vacancy was over in Northern Nevada. All it allowed them to do there was to reduce the amount of overtime that was being created because of the vacancies. So that's where it happened. When you have too much overtime, when you have too many vacancies, creates a safety and security issue because you're going to have staff that are either too exhausted, will be calling out sick more, workers' comp cases go up because staff are exhausted, they're not in their decision-making may not be at their right mind, which is very, very dangerous. So that's why it was more of a relief for the staff over at Northern Nevada CC to move the population out of there.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And again, I think as you follow up, as you finish the housing plan, I think that will be helpful and will help us understand what the plan is for the potential reopening and what budget adjustments may need to be made in relation to that. And to the point about vacancies, just trying to understand, we're going to budget for these positions. We want to fill the positions. Obviously, that's been a historical struggle. So just again, kind of keeping us informed as that moves along, what that's looking like, because we know at the end of the day, the actual staff that we have on the ground really influences a lot of these operational decisions. Members, are there any other questions about the Warm Springs Correctional Facility? All right, seeing none, we will move on to the Tonopah Conservation Camp. And Assemblyman Haven, do you have a question about this? No? All right. Well, all right. Yeah, and honestly, I think this has also been pretty well covered in your presentation. You gave us an update on some of the plans there in terms of trying to move it into mothball status and transition the staff. So again, as you kind of complete all those plans for the facilities, just provide us an update as soon as possible. Members, are there any additional questions on the Tonopah Conservation Camp or anything else related to the department's presentation today? Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. More of a comment than a question, but I think we really need to look and focus on the fact that Tonopah is the geographic center of the state, and it's a long ways from Pioche to Tonopah or Monitor Valley, or if you've got if we've got a fire on Green Monster, Carlin Camp is 200 miles away. So I guess as we look at this, and I know it's a real hardship on you, but that Tonopah camp is probably vital to Central Nevada. And then I think, given its location, you can probably put a little harder people in there because it's a long walk out. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And again, I think as we get some information about that, thankfully, with the timeline, we're not looking necessarily at permanent closure coming up. And again, I think to your point, the difference between Pioche and Ely and Pioche and Tonopah, pretty significant. So we look forward to continuing to evaluate and have conversations about that. Senator Harris.
Thank you so much, Chair Watts. I just have more of a comment than a question. I think it's fairly clear from the discussion that we're going to need a little bit more from you all about what the plan is, and not in a, I think, facility by facility specific plan, but a bigger overall plan about what we're opening, what we're closing, where people are going to be, geographic considerations. And that will then allow us to make the decisions that we have to make about how much money we're going to give you to do that. But right now, we have disparate pieces, disparate plans, a couple of maybes. So whenever you all are ready, and hopefully before budget closing, we'd love to see something comprehensive about reforming the state system, not on a large scale, but I mean opening, closing, and where we're housing folks. So the sooner y'all can get that, the sooner we can do our job. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Chair Harris. And again, I think the other one too is just staff. I think that's something that, again, all of us have heard about. It's across many agencies, but particularly for the operations of the department, for the safety and well-being of the staff, for the safety and well-being of those who are housed in these facilities. We want to make sure that we're doing this right. We've run into issues in the interim where there's significant vacancies, there's significant savings, but there's only so much that we can do as IFC to try and help address some of those things. So we want to make sure that by the time we get the budget approved this session, that the department is on a trajectory that it can provide the staffing that's needed. So with that, seeing no other questions, thank you again very much for your time today. We appreciate it. And with that, we'll move on to the last item on our agenda today, which is public comment. To provide public comment by phone, you can dial in using the call-in information on our agenda, which is posted on the legislature's website. We'll ask anyone providing public comment to limit their remarks to 2 minutes and to please state and spell their name before they begin. With that, do we have anyone wishing to provide public comment here in Carson City?
All right. Hello, everybody. Good morning, Chair Harris, Chair Watts, members of the subcommittee. My name is Gil Lopez, and I am the Executive Director of the Charter School Association of Nevada. We are a membership organization advocating for public charter schools. I'm here to address an incident that occurred the day before Valentine's Day. To provide some context, some of our public charter schools participated in sending Valentine's Day cards to various legislators. We regret that any of the public charter schools may be perceived in connection with the card that Senator Harris received. We acknowledge the card received by Senator Harris was inappropriate and offensive. We regret participating with any organization that holds these views and will speak out against any language that's not inclusive of many students that attend Nevada public charter schools and live in Nevada. We stand in solidarity with Senator Harris and the LGBTQ plus communities of colors, and agree that these types of hateful thoughts, words, and actions have no place in Nevada. As an organization that supports schools in the second largest system of the state, educating nearly 67,000 students and employs over 8,000 adults, CSAN firmly believes that creating and supporting an inclusive space for all people in Nevada is important. We will fight against any words and actions that attempt to make the state, schools, and communities less safe and welcoming. We will continue to work with our school leaders and have the full commitment to create a more inclusive and respectful community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez. Anyone else wishing to provide public comment? Seeing none in Carson City or in Las Vegas, Broadcast Production Services, can we see if anyone wishes to provide public comment by phone?
Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no callers wishing to provide public comment at this time.
All right. Thank you very much, again, members, for your time, for your questions. Thank you again to the Department of Corrections for your forthrightness and for presenting those budget accounts today. With that, we are adjourned.